I'm pleased to introduce now Rob Price. Rob comes from the UK and is co-founder of the Principle of Corporate Digital Responsibility, as well as founder of the Cdr Corporate Digital Responsibility.net network. He's director at a management consultancy, the name of which is Alchemmy. Rob, you will correct me. Alchemmy. So Rob will introduce us to the International Cdr Manifesto and will talk to us about what's happening and what he plans to do in Europe around CDR. So you have 8-10 minutes plus Q&As.
Thanks, Pietro. So it's firstly just to say it's a delight to be part of this discussion. Just sad that I'm dialing in from London rather than being present in Italy for the conversation. I don't think there could have been a better introduction to what I'm talking about than the session that Diva's just kind of done. Everything that she talked about has been core to the heart of the corporate digital responsibility movement over the last 4 years. So I remember sitting in Paris in 2016 talking about misuse of data on the back of Cambridge Analytica and other high-profile impacts on society that no doubt we will have all seen at that time, asking the question of what do we need to do differently. Now, at that time, it was less about the tech giants and more about each of us in every organization in which we operate. What was the responsibility that we had to deliver a more valuable output for society and the planet in the context of the way in which we're using data and digital technologies? Now, from that work, I personally got involved in defining the term corporate digital responsibility around 2017, 2018. But what was interesting for me to discover was that I wasn't the only one. A number of people across Europe, Central Europe especially, had been talking about and continue to talk about corporate digital responsibility in different ways. Now, actually, 80% of that was the same. We were talking about digital ethics, AI ethics, data ethics, the impact on the environment, privacy, safety online, digital well-being. But all of the definitions that were produced were slightly different. Now, what we've tried to do over the last year is to bring that together in a way that helps organizations around the world to look at the ways in which they can improve the impact that they're having to create or to reduce the chance of harm and to create more positive impacts in terms of innovating to solve some of the world's biggest challenges like climate change or biodiversity. So if I can introduce some of the definitions very briefly. Michael Wade, University of Lausanne, produced a definition of CDR that was published in the MIT Sloan Review in 2020. It's probably the one that's most often quoted. Dr. Saskia Dürr in Germany wrote the book, A Practical Guide to Corporate Digital Responsibility in 2020, giving a practical framework to organizations to move this forward. I think last I heard that had been downloaded 15,000 times in Germany in terms of kind of the framework that it enabled. Oliver Merks and Karine Rubner and Angelika Power in Germany behind the CDR building blocks, a practical framework that the business associations there have been using to help 80, 90, 100 plus organizations move forward in the context of the CDR principle, and more. Now, what we've done as a group is to put together all of those kind of definitions around a single holistic framework that brings the best of those definitions, but does so in a manner that's accessible for all countries, all organizations, as much as possible to help them address some of those points that Diva was quite rightly talking about just now. And hence the CDR International Manifesto was launched on the 1st of October. It's available on that website. I'll describe it very briefly, but that's signed up to and collaborated by myself, Michael Wade, Dr. Saskia Dürr, Oliver Merks, and Tim Frick. So we've got Germany, Germany, Switzerland, US, UK, involvement behind it, which I would see as kind of some of the key countries that at the moment have been involved in the CDR movement. Now I know, and Pietro, we talked about this for the last year or so, I know there's interest in Italy, I know there's interest in France, I've seen articles in Poland, South Korea has kind of adopted it in the context of Samsung and a few other organizations there. So we can see the spread of this kind of term and movement helping organizations think. Now, the International CDR Manifesto has 7 principles. The first of those is to think about purpose and trust in the context of the organization, the reputation, the consumers, customers, and employees. And a key part of that is effective, strong governance around the impact of data and algorithms and technology. So what is often called a digital ethics advisory board, but to also advocate for appropriate regulation and policies to be in place, and consistency of policies across geographies, an important part of that. Again, touching on some of the things that Diva was talking about, and indeed the question of how can we bring these organizations and governments together, that's focused around how do we accelerate appropriate regulation to be in place. Second of those principles is about fair and equitable access for all. And that's very much focused around thinking about, yes, accessibility, inclusion, diversity, equity, but also beginning to touch on aspects such as responsible employment rights. If we think about the gig economy, for example, and asking the question of considering your organization and your supply chain to ensure that the partners that you work with have got the same core principles and core impact that they're trying to have as yourself. The third principle is the societal impact, so promote societal well-being, and that's covering aspects such as privacy and personal data governance, algorithms kind of as part of that as well, but thinking also about digital poverty and digital well-being, so making sure that people have got the access and inspiration and learning opportunities, but also that they're protected from harms and kind of able to think about the impact on their mental health and physical health as well. The fourth, consider the economic and societal impact of the things that we're doing. It's interesting that an organization said to me more recently, if only the clean tech sector was considered in the same way the fintech sector was. And I know from the conversations I've had with businesses that there are many innovative things coming out in that space that many big organizations are simply not aware of because they don't have access and hooks into the incubators and accelerators. But it's also thinking about the verifying the data that you use, and indeed kind of ensuring that the data that you provide is verified. So the relationship with third-party stakeholders and algorithms, and also considering the monetization of data in a digital economy. So kind of looking at things like fair taxation and personal benefits. The fifth one is accelerating progress with the impact economy, and that's about understanding how to kind of make sure that things like where the environmental impact through things like offset is done in a verifiable and auditable way, to look at how we can accelerate changes in consumer behaviours such that there is a demand from organisations to treat people in the right way. The sixth one is then looking at how do we have a kind of bigger impact on the planet, so beyond the organisation boundary, to consider how we innovate, well, how we report and how we innovate above and beyond to produce products and services, for example, that deal with carbon removal beyond the immediate responsibilities of our own organisation to have a broader impact on the planet. And the final one kind of it looks at the tech impact of your organisation. So looking at, yes, measuring your carbon footprint, but also, for example, a consideration of what a sustainable IT strategy might look like, things like the Sustainable Web Manifesto, to consider the energy use of coding languages, to consider architectural decisions, how to design in for sustainability rather than simply kind of deal with it at a too late a stage. So that's the International CDR Manifesto. It's on the website. It's available in Italian. Thank you to Pietro for helping me with that. We've also got it launched in French, German, Spanish. I've got Greek and Finnish translations in draft at the moment as well, to make it accessible by all, please have a look at it and see how it can help.
Thank you, Rob. Come diceva Rob, appunto il manifesto è anche in italiano, lo trovate sul sito menzionato, cdr.net, corporatedigitalresponsibility.net, per chi fosse interessato. A quick question, we have 2 minutes left. Which kind of industries, which sectors are more prone at this point? You mentioned Samsung in Korea, but in Europe, particularly in Central Europe, which kind of? And then there is a question on the chat that I will report to you. Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm seeing is certainly kind of in Germany, then a lot of the technology sector or technology-rich organisations are very much seeing this as something to voluntarily adopt to help kind of make sure that their reputation and the work that they do is kind of best appreciated. This morning I was with a media company looking at kind of the way in which they use data, and therefore I think it's relevant to many sectors. And indeed, if we look at the work in Switzerland of the Ethos Foundation, they're engaging with the top Swiss businesses across multiple sectors to look at not only their ESG scoring, but their CDR adherence as part of their future investment. So I think it's relevant to all sectors.